Welcome to the deep dive.
You've probably found yourself wondering sometimes about the signals our everyday tech uses. You know, that invisible world of EMF, RF, maybe microwave radiation coming from your Wi-Fi router or your smart meter, perhaps.
Uh,
We're going to explore that today.
Yeah, exactly. And look, given how much we rely on wireless technology, it's pretty natural to be curious about what's actually going on beneath the surface.
Right.
This isn't about, setting off alarm bells. It's more about getting a clearer picture of the science and the ongoing discussions around, well, potential health implications.
Giving you a more informed perspective.
Did I get the idea?
And to help us navigate this, we're diving into the research and the EMF meter testing done by Chuck Grabens from Computer Care Clinic. We've spent some time with an audio recording where Chuck shares his findings.
Yeah, findings on common household devices, office devices too.
So our aim here is really to distill his work down, get to the essentials for you. Our mission today really is to unpack Chuck's exploration. We want to clarify the key principles, electromagnetic radiation principles, and highlight the levels he actually observed from various devices.
And talk about what those findings might suggest.
Exactly, in the context of what we currently understand. So let's get right to it.
Okay, let's start with the basics. EMF and RF. Chuck kicks things off by sort of painting a picture of the electromagnetic spectrum. He contrasts the really low frequencies, like sound waves, where, get this, a single wave can stretch longer than a football field.
Wow.
With the super high end, think X-rays, gamma rays, tiny wavelengths, smaller than atoms.
Right. And the crucial point he makes here is that radio frequency, RF, that's kind of the umbrella term, it covers both radio waves and microwaves.
Okay.
And Chuck emphasizes that RF emissions are, well, they're essentially energy moving as waves.
Yeah.
Generated by moving electrical charges, like you'd find in an antenna.
Right, like your favorite FM radio station Chuck mentioned, it might be broadcasting around, 100 million RF waves every second?
Yeah, something like that. It gives you a sense of the sheer activity involved.
And of course, RF powers a lot more than just radio.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
As Chuck points out, modern telecommunications, it's all built on EMF, completely.
Right.
But beyond that, you've got RF energy used in microwave ovens, industrial heating processes, medical imaging like MRIs, even certain medical treatments, radar systems. It's everywhere.
And it's not just human-made, is it?
No, that's a good point Chuck brings up. There are natural RF sources, too, generated by the Earth itself, even cosmic stuff. So we're kind of constantly bathed in it to some degree, naturally.
Okay, now Chuck draws a really important line in the sand, doesn't he, between non-ionizing and ionizing radiation.
Yes, very important. Ionizing EMF radiation, think certain types of UV light, X-rays, that carries enough energy to actually knock electrons out of atoms, disrupt chemical bonds.
Which can damage cells. Definitely something we know to be careful with.
Exactly. But then you have RF radiation, the signals for radio, TV, cell phones, Wi-Fi, that's classified as non-ionizing, meaning it doesn't have that same high-energy kick to break chemical bonds in that direct way. However, Chuck does note that pretty much any device that uses power plugged in or battery.
Like everything these days.
Pretty much. Power lines, cell towers, our phones, routers, tablets, TVs, computers, they're all emitting some form of EMF radiation.
So let's zoom in a bit on what's probably most relevant day-to-day for people. Microwaves and Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Chuck defines microwaves as a specific band within RF, right?
Yeah, frequencies from hundreds of megahertz, up to gigahertz. That's billions of cycles per second.
And the classic example is the kitchen microwave.
Right, the household microwave oven, typically running around 2.45 gigahertz.
And what's interesting, as Chuck points out, is how close that frequency is to the really common 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi band. And lots of cordless phones, too.
It definitely makes you wonder, doesn't it? Could my microwave mess with my Wi-Fi?
It's crossed my mind. But Chuck explains that, most modern microwave ovens, they're designed with pretty effective shielding. They shouldn't really leak enough radiation to cause significant interference, at least, if they're working properly.
He does add a little caution, though, right? Older units, or maybe ones that have been damaged.
Yeah, the shielding might be compromised, so that's maybe something to think about if you're getting weird interference when the microwave's on.
And if you are having interference issues and you've got newer gear, Chuck mentions the 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi band could be an option.
Ah, because it's a different frequency.
Exactly. Operates much higher. Of course, all your devices need to support it.
Okay, this leads us naturally into the big question for many people. The potential biological effects of all this RF and microwave stuff.
Right. And Chuck acknowledges, look, all EMF radiation interacts with the body somehow. The real debate is about the extent, the nature, the significance of that interaction.
The most established primary effect, he says, is heating.
Yes, the potential to cause heating of water within our body tissues. That's been the kind of mainstream understanding for non-ionizing radiation. You need pretty high levels of microwave energy for significant heating.
But our understanding is evolving, isn't it? Chuck brings up that 2011 WHO classification.
Yeah, the World Health Organization's IIRC, the cancer agency, they classified RF electromagnetic fields as possibly carcinogenic to humans.
Based on what, specifically?
Based on studies suggesting a potential link between heavy mobile phone use and a type of brain tumor called glioma.
That definitely got people talking.
It really did. He also points out some body parts, like the eyes and testes, are thought to be maybe more vulnerable to RF heating.
Why is that?
Basically, less blood flow compared to other tissues. Blood flow helps dissipate heat, so areas with less circulation might heat up more easily.
Okay.
And he references some lab studies now. These used very high RF levels, much higher than typical environmental exposure.
Right. Important caveat.
Very important. But in those high-level experiments, they showed things like cataracts in rabbits and temporary infertility in some animal models.
But again, he's careful to stress that the RF levels we usually encounter day to day are generally way, way below what's needed for that kind of significant heating effect.
Generally, yes. Though he does mention specific workplaces, around high-powered RF sources where exposure limits could potentially be exceeded.
And this is where it gets a bit more complex, right? Because Chuck also touches on newer research.
Exactly. Research suggesting biological effects happening in animals, in tissues, at RF levels much lower than those causing heating. Levels may be closer to what we experience.
What kind of effects are we talking about?
Well, the studies he alludes to have pointed towards things like potential changes in the immune system, neurological effects, behavioral changes, even interactions with how certain drugs work, effects on brain tissue, some indicators of DNA effects.
But the cancer link is still inconclusive at these lower levels.
That's right. He's clear that the research looking for a direct causal link between typical RF microwave exposure and cancer is, well, it's still ongoing and hasn't reached a definitive conclusion. It remains inconclusive.
This seems like a good place to bring in Dr. Magda Havas's perspective, which Chuck highlights. Her point about how new all this is, relatively speaking.
Yeah, that's a powerful point. Think about it. Smartphones have only really been mainstream for, the last 10, maybe 15 years?
Wi-Fi maybe 15, 20 years widely. Smart meters, even more recent for many people.
Exactly. We just don't have decades and decades of data on what happens when a whole population is exposed so pervasively for so long.
And Dr. Havas also emphasizes a shift in how we're exposed, right?
Right.
From intermittent to constant.
Yes. It used to be more sporadic. You made a call, you used the microwave. Now, with things like Wi-Fi routers just sitting there, broadcasting beacon signals 24/7.
Even when you're not actively online.
Right. The exposure has become much more continuous for many people.
And Chuck reminds us, those radiation levels actually go up when you're actively using the connection.
Yeah, both at the router and your device, your laptop, your phone, when you're uploading or downloading data, the emissions increase during that activity.
He mentioned something about European devices being different.
Yeah, he mentioned that in Europe, you can apparently get things like voice-activated baby monitors or cordless phones that only radiate RFs when they're actually in use, transmitting sound.
Ah, so they're not constantly pulsing a signal.
Seems to be the idea. He noted that's less common in North America, where many cordless phone bases, for instance, emit continuously.
This whole discussion leads into the concept of electronic hypersensitivity, or EHS. Chuck introduces this. What exactly is it supposed to be?
Well, he describes it as a condition where some individuals report experiencing a whole range of symptoms when they're exposed to EMF.
Like what kinds of symptoms?
It's quite a list. Things like persistent fatigue, sleep problems, headaches, just general discomfort, trouble concentrating, maybe depression or anxiety, memory issues, visual disturbances, ringing in the ears.
Wow, quite varied.
Yeah, skin problems, heart palpitations, irregular heartbeat, dizziness, loss of appetite, even nausea or movement difficulties in some reported cases.
And the key thing Chuck mentions is that for people who identify with this sensitivity,
their reported symptoms often lessen or sometimes disappear entirely when they spend time in environments with significantly lower electromagnetic fields. Electromagnetically clean environments, as they're sometimes called.
he even mentions some predictions about how common this might become.
Yeah, referencing predictions suggesting, potentially a noticeable percentage of the population might experience some degree of this sensitivity in the future. It raises questions.
And that some places are actually starting to react.
He pointed out that some countries or regions are beginning to take steps, like considering removing Wi-Fi from certain public areas, like libraries or schools, and looking into creating sort of white zones or radiation-free zones.
Okay, so that's the backdrop. Now let's get to Chuck's own testing. He used an actual EMF meter, right?
Yeah.
An X-Tech 4800836.
Yes, he did. To measure RF radiation levels in, typical spots, his home, his office, or store.
So what did he find? Near a wireless router, for instance.
Okay, so in his store, getting close to a wireless router, he recorded spikes. Peaks up to 6 microwatts per cubic centimeter.
6. And he mentioned bioinitiative.org.
Yeah, he referenced their charts as a resource people look at, which compile scientific studies suggesting potential effects at different exposure levels. Though, as we've said, and he notes, these aren't necessarily proven long-term cause and effect studies yet. It's an aggregation of research.
Got it. And then the smart meter, that reading seemed to really catch his attention.
It did sound like it. He measured a peak reading of 37.28 microwatts per cubic centimeter.
Whoa, that's way higher than the router.
Significantly higher peak, yeah. Now, he stressed it's pulsed energy. It's not emitting that level constantly. It sends out bursts. But his point was, these meters are often installed on the outside wall of a house, sometimes right near a bedroom or main living area. And he again referenced those bioinitiative charts, linking that type of pulsed radiation level to potential immune system effects.
Interesting. What about the microwave oven? We talked about shielding.
Right. Even with the shielding, when it was running, he detected, quote, considerable energy very close to the unit. He mentioned potential effects like altered cell membranes at that very close range, although he sensibly advises, don't stand right up against your microwave while it's cooking.
Good advice generally.
Definitely. And he did observe that as soon as he moved, even just a few feet away, the levels dropped right back down to near background.
Okay, what about devices we use really close to us, like laptops?
Yeah, he tested his laptop during data transfer. It reached around 2.3 microwatts per cubic centimeter.
Still lower than the router peak, but measurable.
Measurable, yeah. And again, referencing potential concerns from the literature, he mentioned possible neurological effects and even potential risks to male fertility with that kind of exposure, especially if you're using it directly on your lap for long periods.
And cell phones, especially during a call.
That was another high one. He measured near his wife's cell phone during a call, and it hit 7 microwatts per cubic centimeter.
Higher than the router again.
Yes. And he suggested this was likely because they were in an area with a weaker cell signal, causing the phone to boost its power output to connect properly.
Ah, so signal strength matters.
It seems so. He contrasted that 7 with the spikes from just using Wi-Fi on a device, which were more in the 3 to 4 microwatt range in his tests.
So the takeaway is that those higher levels during calls are intermittent, maybe short bursts, but they could be quite significant bursts.
That seems to be his observation, yeah. Significant bursts of exposure right near your head, unless you're using speaker or headphones.
Okay, so drawing from all this, his testing, the background info, Chuck offers some practical steps, some precautions people might consider.
Yes, some straightforward recommendations to potentially reduce your overall exposure.
Like what?
Well, a big one is simply distance. Increase the distance between yourself and wireless routers, and also cell phones when possible.
Because the intensity drops off quickly with distance.
Exactly. That's a fundamental principle. So don't sit right next to the router if you can help it. For phone calls, use headphones or speakerphone. Keep the device itself away from your head.
What else?
Avoid sleeping with your phone right under your pillow. Don't carry it in your pocket all day long, especially close to sensitive areas. And maybe the simplest one, turn off wireless devices when you don't actually need them.
Like the Wi-Fi router at night.
Yeah, he suggests even considering unplugging the router overnight, if that works for you, reducing that constant exposure while you sleep.
And his final thought was kind of sobering, wasn't it? About this being new territory.
Yeah, he basically concluded by saying, look, this level of widespread exposure is a relatively recent phenomenon in human history. And to some extent, we're all kind of navigating this new environment together.
The guinea pigs, as he put it, urging caution.
Urging a degree of caution as we learn more, yeah.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. To recap our deep dive into Chuck Grodin's exploration, we've covered quite a bit.
We have. The basic nature of RF and microwave radiation, that interesting overlap in frequencies between things like microwaves and Wi-Fi.
The ongoing research into biological effects, not just the heating effect, but these potential non-thermal effects too.
Right, and this idea of increasing environmental exposure, the shift from intermittent to more constant signals, plus the whole emerging awareness around electronic hypersensitivity.
And importantly, the actual levels Chuck measured from everyday devices like routers, smart meters, phones, laptops.
Putting some numbers to it based on his specific tests.
And I think the key takeaway is while the science is still evolving and definitive long-term conclusions are, still being researched, having a clearer understanding of where these signals come from, the potential levels involved, it really empowers you, our listener.
Absolutely. It helps you make more informed choices about how you interact with all this technology in your own life.
It's not about being scared necessarily, but being aware.
Exactly. And just as Chuck concluded, maybe adopting some sensible, prudent precautionary steps seems like a reasonable approach while we continue to learn more about any long-term implications.
Increase distance, use speakerphone, turn things off when not needed. Simple stuff, potentially.
Simple stuff, yeah.
So on that note, here's maybe a final thought for you to take away. Just take a moment sometime to consider your own daily dance with these wireless technologies. How much are you using them? How close are they? Maybe explore some of the resources mentioned like bioinitiative.org or just look into the broader scientific discussion from various perspectives.
Yeah, it's definitely an area where staying curious and thinking critically can be really valuable as things continue to develop.